I was arrested, I was even told by the arresting officer, like, you're making mistakes now, but you're gonna be okay, right? I went through an alternative sentencing program called Youth Court in Oakland, California, and I was given a social worker. I did community service hours. And even kids that I was arrested with that didn't look like me, went to juvenile hall. So the disparity was blatant, and I understood it even as a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old. I understood that what was happening was not okay, and that I was benefiting in a way that a lot of people were not. And so based on that, I kind of re-engaged in school, and that became the way that I turned it around. I really grew up and thought that I would not live to see 20 years old, which is what, based on what I was doing when I was 13, I shouldn't have. But because I had this opportunity and I was given a social worker and I was able to get out of this abusive household and this situation and re-engage in school, I had a different outcome. And I was able to go to college. And it was sitting there in college and still feeling like I didn't belong and that it was a weird place to be. I went to Scripps College, which is a wonderful college in California, but with a lot of wealthy kids that I didn't feel comfortable around. And it wasn't until I found the program that allowed me to go and teach in the juvenile hall. And we were teaching poetry. It's very similar to the program I think that's co-hosting this event, that I felt like, okay, this is the reason why I'm in college. This is why I'm getting an education so that I can do this, right? Like, this makes everything make sense. So I taught in that program. I directed Othello in the juvenile hall. It was really fun. And I wanted to keep teaching, and I moved to New Orleans immediately after college and started trying to figure out how I could teach in prisons, but it wasn't simple in Louisiana because there weren't programs. There were not opportunities. I thought I could just go to Louisiana and just walk into whatever program existed there and start doing the work again, and it turned out you had to make one. So I met Sarita Stein-Martin, and her and I worked together to create a college program in the women's prison in Louisiana, and we now are doing a lot of policy work related to getting the Pell Grant back. In 2017, we wrote the bill in Louisiana to remove the criminal history question off the college application, and that passed unanimously in Louisiana, which never happens in Louisiana. So it's a big deal for us. And we've worked on that legislation now. It's passed in 2 other states, Washington and Maryland, and it just passed both the House and the Senate in Colorado. It's heading to the governor. We've got a set of 10 states we're working on over the next 2 years to do that, and we're hoping to also get something in the Higher Education Act. I won't go too into it because I'm sure you're going to ask me about policy. Yeah. But I will say that I had a lot of opportunities, and that's why I'm here today, and that's why I do the work that I do, so that we can, because I know that everyone deserves those opportunities.
Thank you, Annie.
Oh.
It's your turn.
Okay, so I just want to speak a little bit about how education was defined in my life specifically, but also how or the lack thereof affects returning citizens generally. So initially I went to prison at the age of 17. I was a juvenile and I was charged as an adult. I just came home 8 months ago. I did 21 years, and then I was released. Originally, I had a life sentence. When I initially went to prison as a juvenile, I was on the juvenile block in DC jail. At that time, it's different now, but at that time, they had no educational opportunity for me. We weren't even allowed to enroll into a GED course. Also, from there, I went down Florida, and during that time period, we wasn't allowed to participate in GED programs. It wasn't until I went to the federal BOP that I was allowed to get my GED, and I did that as soon as I got there. As time went on, I reached a point where I began to feel like I wasn't gonna have to do that life sentence. I just felt like that's not what God had planned for me. There was something more to my life. So once I began to develop that mind state, I began to study a variety of things, and then I began to think how I could further my education, because my thinking was, once I'm released from prison in society, you need to have some type of skill set that you can do in order to have a career, not just to get a job, but to have a career, something that you can build your life around. And I said, in order to do that, you need education. So they didn't have the educational opportunities for post-secondary education for free. You had to pay for it. And I come from a background where my family is not wealthy. I wasn't wealthy, so I had to figure out if I was going to take this correspondence course, how was I going to come up with the finances in order to do it. So I had a discussion with my mother about it, and we just made some sacrifices so that I could have that particular self-investment, because I really believed that I would have my freedom. And upon being free, I knew the situation that I would be in, being one, a black man who's a convicted felon with no skills, according to them. So I enrolled into a college correspondence course. It took me maybe about 2.5 years to receive my associate's degree in paralegal studies. And then once I was free, that allowed me to have an opportunity to go to Georgetown University in their paralegal program to get a certification. And in turn, that allowed me to get job offers from law firms in the District of Columbia. And then that allowed me to get job opportunities with DC government. But absent me having that particular skill set and being able to get that education, I would have run into a situation where I'm released, but I have nothing to validate my education, and I'm a convicted felon, so who wants to hire me? And then I don't just want any job, I want to be able to take care of myself and take care of my family. And this is a situation with the average man or woman who is released from prison. And when these people are released from prison and they run into these brick walls and they're not able to have sustainable employment that allows them to have a decent livelihood to take care of themselves and their family, what happens now, it becomes a public safety factor, because they're going to go back to crime. We into trying to bring down recidivism levels. If you ever look at the numbers in recidivism, you'll see those who are able to get a higher education while confined, the chances for going back to prison is minimal. And so this is one of the things that we really got to emphasize, and I'm just real passionate and an advocate about education within the institutions, because if you allow these people to make investments within themselves, even the ones that may not see too much daylight at the end of the tunnel, it gives them something to aim for. It gives meaning to their life while they're confined that will get them out of doing engaging in certain behaviors that's against the rules and regulations of the institution. And then for those who are coming home, it gives them a sense of pride of having that higher education. And then once they are free, it allows them, because if you go to somebody, you have a specific skill set, even though you may have a felony on your record, a person may give you a chance. You're in a better situation than a person who doesn't have that particular skill set of education. And so I just really want to put that out there. You know, we really need to support having the higher education within the institutions. You know, when I enrolled in my correspondence course, I was actually discouraged from the educational administrators in that institution to not go for my degree, to just try to get a certification. So I don't want no certification, I'm trying to get my degree. You know, and they're running down to me about how I'm not going to be able to afford it, all the different adversities that I may encounter. I'm like, how could you even make this particular type of judgment on what I can and cannot do? You don't even know me. All you know is that I'm in this prison. So, you know, I think that more than anything, education is key. Education is liberating. And I always tell people when I talk about education that the more you know, the more you can do, the more opportunities are available for you. But if you don't know nothing, you can't do nothing. And education expands your mind and opens you up to a whole new world where possibilities is endless. And a person coming from a situation like prison and really realize that the possibilities are endless, they're going to aim endless, they're going to aim high. Education allows you to see that I don't have to do this. When I was in prison and I'm taking these courses and I'm seeing my grades come back, I'm like, wow, I'm doing this while I'm in prison. Man, don't tell me what I can do with my freedom. But this is the type of things that these self-investments, you know what I mean, they impose on you. This is great. I can do anything. And I know it sounds cliche, but since I've been home, which has been 8 months, I've turned down about 5 jobs. I got 2 jobs. I got other offers for other things, but it's all premised around what I know how to do and my education. And my situation is not unique, but if the people are provided with an opportunity to get education, they can come out here into the world and be in a similar situation. And if you've been in a similar situation as what I mentioned, your chances of going back to crime, you don't have time to do no crime or to think about no crime. You know what I mean? And people always talk about recidivism and people commit crime. When they have these opportunities, they don't have to do it. Crime is basically a result of like poverty and the lack of economic mobility and elevation. You understand what I'm saying? And if people can take care of themselves, they don't have to commit crime. Sometimes it evolves into other things, but initially people commit crimes for economic reasons. And if you have education, it allows you to sustain yourself economically.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Welcome home to you. I know we are all incredibly proud of all the strides that you've made in only 8 months. When you think about, recently I heard someone say it was 44,000 barriers to re-entry. And so I know personally, like maybe a handful to 10, but when you think about 44,000, I'm trying to locate all of them just so that we know where to find them. But to think that you've been able to accomplish that after 20 years of incarceration, 20 plus years of incarceration, and do what you are doing and have done is incredible. So thank you.
Thank you.
You can give them a clap for that. Okay, John, you're up. So, can you share your personal experience in connection to the issue and why the Obama administration thought it was important to launch a pilot program to help folks who are incarcerated get access to high-quality education? And today, why is it important for EdTrust to be a part of these coalitions and fighting for educational justice?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'm just honored to be here with this panel and to be in this room of people who share the belief and conviction and the power of education. For me, you know, and Annie's experience raised this for me. Like, I experienced trauma as a kid, and that profoundly shaped the trajectory of my life. The thing that made all the difference for me was that I was blessed to have a series of New York City school teachers who helped me stay on track, because I lost my mom when I was 8, my dad when I was 12. When it was just me and my dad was quite sick with undiagnosed Alzheimer's. So home was this place that was scary and inconsistent, and it was teachers who gave me a sense of hope. But when I was a teenager, like many teenagers who experienced trauma, I got in trouble a lot. And I was mad. I was mad at adults, I was mad at my parents, I was just mad at the world. And I got in trouble and I got kicked out of high school. And I always tell folks, wherever I go, I'm the first U.S. Secretary of Education. I've been kicked out of high school. But I hope not the last, because part of my story, like for all of you, is that there were people who were willing to give me a second chance, who were willing to see me as more than just the sum of the mistakes that I had made. And because I had counselors and mentors and some family members who saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself, they helped me get my life on a different trajectory. And so I became an educator, a teacher, and a principal because I wanted to try to do for other kids what educators had done for me. And that, to me, is the spirit behind Second Chance Pell. I mean, for the Obama administration, what we were trying to figure out is what could we do using executive authority, because it's probably shocking to hear Congress didn't always do the things that we proposed. What could we do that would make a tangible difference in people's life trajectories? And what we saw was that Congress had made this terrible mistake in 1994 of banning access to Pell Grants. It was terrible public policy and a moral mistake, I believe. because education has such transformative power beyond the fact that people are much less likely to return to prison if they have those opportunities. Education is about humanity and about honoring people's humanity and investing in people's humanity. And so this was a terrible mistake that was made in 1994. We knew that it was going to be very difficult at that time to get Congress to repeal the ban, but we also knew there was experimental authority under the Higher Education Act where we could create a pilot project to demonstrate the power of access to Pell Grants for folks who are incarcerated. And so we launched Second Chance Pell. There are 65 colleges and universities using Second Chance Pell today. It's over 8,000 students who are already benefiting and thousands more over the next few years. It is one of the only genuine bipartisan issues with momentum in this city. There are lots of reasons when you turn on cable news today, regardless of your politics, to be depressed about the state of our politics. This is a reason to be hopeful. This is an issue where Democrats and Republicans in Congress are coming together. It's a place where the Obama administration and the current administration have the same view. There are not many. That list is very, very short. But on this issue, I think everyone understands it is the responsible thing to do. It is the right thing to do. It will make communities safer and stronger, but most importantly, it will transform lives of folks who are incarcerated, of their family members, of their communities. And so I just couldn't be more proud to be in this room because I know how hard folks on this panel and in this room have worked on this issue. And the harvest is coming. We've been working hard, but I believe the harvest is coming.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Gerard.
Okay.
Why is it important for local officials like governors and mayors and others to get involved, in your opinion? And also, can you also share your experience as to why you feel it's important for people who are incarcerated to have access to high-quality education also?
First of all, let me thank Free Minds Education Trust for the opportunity to be here. So in 1989, I'm an undergraduate student here in Washington, D.C. at Howard. Howard University back then still had the Howard University Hotel. And so in there, drinking beer, sitting next to this pretty lady, and we have a conversation about mentorship. And I thought maybe she wouldn't mentor me. And she says, no, mentorship for other people. So that was another story. And she said, listen, there's a forward-thinking judge. And judge, if you're watching or anyone around you is watching, because I've never met the person, he or she, a judge at the Superior Court level said, listen, I'm going to start a program called HITS. And HITS is an acronym for High Intensity Training Seminar. And it was a judge who basically said, listen, you young men between the ages of 16 and 19 are making some bad mistakes. It's more Bob Marley stuff, weed, a few other things here. It's not the Charles Manson stuff. But between Marley and Manson, you can find yourself in a mess. One foot on the banana peel, one on jail. And so what I'm going to do is put you in a diversion program so you can be professionals around Washington, D.C. who are in the academy, who are lawyers, who are entrepreneurs, who work for city government. And I ended up volunteering for that program for 2 years, mostly African-American, Hispanic young men. And it was that experience amongst 4 others that made me really decide that I wanted to go into education. And every year we'd have a reward celebration. The parents would come, we'd all cry. And I remember one dad walking up to me and said, I want to thank you for working with my son. And I said, why? He says, because whatever you guys are doing is making a difference. He's cleaning his room. And so I talked to the young men. I said, so what happened? At some point, I'm hearing stories you mentioned. Education and literacy. We say education, but really the foundation is literacy. And so they said, we just have challenges with school. Some of them may have been undiagnosed. So I finished Howard in 1991, went back to Los Angeles and became a 5th grade school teacher, and things kind of went on from there. That's the professional story. The personal story is I didn't learn to read or write myself until I was 20 in a real way. Most people don't know that. I spent most of my time in high school doing 5 things: smoking weed, drinking beer, playing football, avoiding homework, and chasing pretty women like Topeka. Because I was a football player who understood that people like Topeka were waiting for me in college anyway. When I got to college, she was going to do my homework. If I had children at the time, the boosters were going to give me money. We do the handshake on the field using a $100 bill in there. So once I had the epiphany of going to a community college, learning how to read, get excited, it moved. I've worked for 2 governors, both of them Republicans. I remember the Republican Party. For me, I worked for 2 governors who really thought this was important, not because it was a partisan issue, but it was the right thing to do. I remember Governor Bob McDowell at the time was governor of Virginia. At that time, he had actually restored voting rights to more people who were formerly incarcerated than any other governor at the time. Now let's talk raw politics. Virginia at the time was still a purple state, now shifted over even more purple, closer to blue. We had people on the right say, wait a minute, if you give these people the right to vote, you know they're going to vote Democrat. You know we're going to lose power in the House, we're going to lose power in the Senate, possibly even the governorship. And what the governor said was, then we as Republicans have to do a better job of marketing our message. I'm not going to avoid returning the franchise because of partisanship. I'm going to do it because I want to empower people to do the right thing. And so it's messages like that, also understanding governors understand that education is one of the top 3 line items in the budget, and that workforce development is more than a slogan, it's really ways of bringing businesses to the state. This just makes sense from human dignity standpoint, from human capital, but if education is to free your mind, I know personally, especially, I've been free through education, so I want to play a role through public policy to free more people.
Slid in that you're a member of the Republican Party real quick. I don't know if everybody caught that, but I did. Okay. I don't know how we are on time, and I can keep going. I just want to check. We're good? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I think this is a question to the entire panel then. What would you think are the most important ways to connect these conversations on the conditions of reentry specifically, as relates to education and then people coming home? I know you talked a lot about it, but I want to hear, where other people think that there's a connection. Specifically, when we think about the Second Chance Pell, I'm thinking about Second Chance employers, because you've given great examples of how many job opportunities that you have, how many you've had to turn down, but that's not always the case. So I want us to touch a little bit about that in each of our respective states and in our fields. Anybody can start.
Well, I can start just, obviously employment is really important and education is a bigger part of that as well. And what I spend a lot of time thinking about is barriers to higher education. So I'm going to twist your question a little bit if that's okay. Yeah. And that's really what the Ban the Box legislation on the college level is about, is that you don't need to know about someone's criminal history in order to decide whether or not they're good enough to go to college. It doesn't make any sense. And really, it's not just one question, usually. In all the states we're working in, there are 3-page applications of questions about your criminal history. List every arrest. List the arresting officer. List give us your probation or parole officer's name and phone number. Before I've even stepped foot on your campus, talked to anybody, why do you need this much information? And what it does is people just don't apply, right? People just don't do that. And that's what it's intended to do, whether or not they admit it, is that it deters people and they don't apply. So in Colorado, the University of Colorado system has 30,000 students, and they were like, our system's fine, no problems. We had about 200 people complete our criminal history supplement application. And I said, well, if 1 in 3 people have a criminal conviction and you're only getting 200 applications from the state of Colorado when you have 30,000 students, you're missing a lot of people. And so we think a lot about removing these initial barriers and then supporting people when they're on campus, and how we could make colleges supportive environments for students with convictions. And so, so I would even say, like, for myself, like, I not once talked about my arrests in college. Even though I was working in these programs and doing all these things, I never felt comfortable disclosing that, because there was never a space for it, there was never an environment that felt welcoming, and I had no idea how that would be received by all of these people. So I think, focusing on removing barriers to admissions and then making people feel comfortable on campus and supporting students when they're there, so that they can get the education in a meaningful way, is really important to that conversation as well.
Thank you, Andy. And I think, just to add on what you were saying, when I think about families and, the children of incarcerated parents, how it's very important to also support them while they're pursuing their education as well, for groups to have different places for kids to meet up while they're in school to talk about the issues that they're going through, and also have support from their, professors to connect them to their parents who are still incarcerated. Do you find any of that also?
Absolutely, yes. There's a lot. We are starting a program called Operation Girls, which is focusing on youth who have parents in prison or impacted by the juvenile system themselves. And these kids don't have any place to talk about what they're going through. I didn't have any place to talk about what I was going through as a kid either. And so I think giving people that space and opportunity in college and then before college, and so, one of the things we're doing is surveying all the youth in Orleans Parish to see who is impacted by incarceration, just to see how prevalent. We think it's very prevalent, but nobody's looking at it. And part of why nobody's looking at it is if they knew that information, they have to do something about it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that we're thinking about a lot, is how to provide those resources and support for kids to process that loss and that experience that they're going through every day. And then when parents come home, to help them to reconnect and to rekindle. Sometimes people just think, okay, great, like my mom's home, is going to be good, but that person's been through trauma, you've been through trauma. There's a lot to process there to support that family. And I think, education has a very important role to play in those spaces for every member of the family. Definitely.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I just would add to that, I appreciate what you're saying, Annie. What I would just add to that is that the through line then for colleges that are taking advantage of Pell or are not taking advantage of Pell and are offering college programming in prisons need to also make that commitment to that student that once they get out of prison and maybe they haven't finished, that they will provide that pathway for them to finish. I think it's kind of disingenuous and egregious for someone to go, hey, let me educate you while you're incarcerated, and suddenly I won't let you on my campus, I won't let you in, you have to check this box. But as if you didn't know me for the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years in which you felt like you could educate me in this carceral space. And so it needs to be a part of any conversation about Pell. That if we go and start with you in the beginning, we bring you this high quality education, we're with you for the long haul at our campuses, and we make a commitment to you. If you don't do that, you are disingenuous and you're not serving rehabilitation. You've actually created another collateral consequence to my criminal conviction. Now suddenly I have these credits, I'm unfinished, and I don't have a pathway to finish. And so you should not be allowed to do that. And I hope that as we think about Pell and the REAL Act and what it looks like, that we think about that end product. Also, I would add to that, that when we're doing a measure of colleges and universities that provide Pell, we're thinking about who those, what are the metrics? How do we measure if the university is doing right? If you don't include conversation of the students who are actually in that program as a part of that way in which to measure how that program is doing, you have dropped the ball again. If you make the metrics only statistics and recidivism rates, and you didn't talk to the people who actually were in the programming, again, you are reifying carceral logics that remove my personhood as a formerly incarcerated person. And you must stop that. You must stop that. We need to be a part of the end game, the middle game, the pre-game. We need to be part of this.
I just go back to the point you made earlier about the sort of the volume of collateral consequences. That I see the work on the Pell ban repeal as the start of a process, not the end of a process. We then have to look at making sure everybody has the right to vote. We have to make sure that folks have access to all areas of employment. We've got to make sure that folks can have access to housing, right? So states and communities have layered on top of incarceration all of these collateral consequences. that create a permanent caste system that lock people out of opportunity. And we have to dismantle all of that. And that means all of us have to stay committed to this work, not only to win the victory on Pell restoration, but to keep working on removing all of those barriers to opportunity.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks you. And when all of you were just talking about, having access to education while incarcerated, I remember looking, and I can't remember, maybe someone else will know, but the BOP has these guidances about different things that you can do. Bureau of Prisons, it's a federal system. And I remember reading about furloughs. And it was written that you can take an educational furlough, which meant you can go off of campus and pursue your education. And I remember saying, hey, well, if this college, because I was in Connecticut, and then you have Yale right there, you have New York, so Columbia was right there, New York Theological Seminary, which is where I went when I came home. If we're able to take a furlough, or it's actually written in the guidances that this is acceptable or doable, then why aren't you allowing me to do that, right? That it's already certain policies and stipulations already written into certain things. So I think a question then, I'm just in thought, how do we begin to then hold the government accountable to then really re-implementing these things that are already written? Because to everyone's point that spending 20 years in prison, say, being able to pursue your education, but then not saying you finish and you come home, and then having to jump into a whole nother environment, if given the opportunity to be on a campus, which could be huge in some cases, can be discouraging. If you allow people while incarcerated to begin to then go off of or out of the prison onto a college campus and come back, because again, it is already written, why is that something that's not being taken advantage, and why are the wardens, why are they the ones who actually have the ability to decide whether or not you can or cannot go?
So I take a Solomon approach for the book of Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. And so when we talk about higher education in prison, we often start at 1994. We have to go back to really to 1965 and the actual passage of the Higher Education Act that was signed by President Johnson into law, who's the only American president with a degree in education. So from 65 up to 94, you actually had millions of public dollars at the federal level funding states that actually allowed people to leave prison to actually take classes on campus. That's not a new, like I would say, it's not a revelation. And so what I would say is, I'm from California. Go back to your home state. Michelle's a perfect example of someone who's doing a deep archival dive in your own state. Go back to your state and figure out what was taking place between 1965 and 1964. What programs were there? Were people actually leaving campus? And in fact, if it leaving prison to go to campus? And if they were there any incidents? What did people say? Read your local newspapers. Oh my God, they're coming to class. Or maybe you read a report that says, you know what? This actually adds to the diversity of thought. So I would go back and say that this is nothing new. But go back and look at your state and find some very interesting nuggets of truth.
Anybody else have that on that? No?
Well, I'm just saying, so what he's talking about is, and what you're talking about is the collateral consequences database that's available online at the National Council of City Governments, that website, and it categorizes all 47,000. But what it does not break down exactly of those 47,000 laws, what is the particularity of the jobs and the employment that's locked out, that's locked out, that's locked out. And I did that for the state of Indiana. And what I found, okay, there's 790 in the state of Indiana, but all of the places that the majority of those laws lock people out was in employment, entrepreneurship and business ownership, and occupational licensure, the top three. And the top three in my state. And of course, then there's all of these other different categorizations. And I think it's important for people to understand that that supports this idea that if we've got all these legal consequences, and they're so varied, the number one field that's locked out in the state of Indiana is healthcare. As if you can't be a massage therapist technically, right? And something something that you could get a certification in a matter of weeks, right? You're not allowed to be. So from the dentist it takes all the years to learn how to do dentistry from the massage therapist, those jobs are locked out in the state of Indiana. And you have to go back and look, because they help support the social consequences of criminal convictions. In other words, in our state, you can't get a dog at the Humane Society, a rescue shelter, because you're going to have to check a box on that application.
Wow.
So if we don't begin to address our particular states and the particular collateral consequences, you will never get to the point where we can have real meaningful conversations about the social consequences that are built around individual conversations, individual relationships that we have with people every day. Where you might go to try to, I don't know, join a volunteer group, join your child's PTA, be a coach in Little League. Suddenly, the social consequences that are not supported by the law are everywhere. And no one has really you can't quantify the everyday, right? But they are supported by the legal. And so we need to go back to our states and really start to unpack that beautiful database that's out there and get very particular, let's get very specific on the fields in which people are locked out of, so that we can have some real important conversations.
So how do you go about changing some of those things? When you think about the occupational licensures, I know many women, and even the state of New Jersey, go to beauty or in prison get their license to do hair. Come home and have to get licensed in the state. Go back to school because they need certain hours in that state. Pay for the education, go to sit for their board, and then they're denied because of the conviction. Then there's legislation that's trying to be passed and then it's blocked. Because they feel that people shouldn't have an opportunity to start their own business, that either they need to work for other people when they're transitioning, but then you try to work for people and then they want a box, so then they don't want to hire you. So again, it's like, you're getting smacked each way. But I think when you talk about there aren't laws in place, right, that allows you to actually address these social consequences, then how do you actually go back and say, hey, what's going on with the PTA? We understand that such and such's mom is incarcerated, and she's just coming home and wants to be involved. Like, how do we change those things within our own communities?
Well, one of the things that we started to do is look at the collateral consequences in our state and look for the low-hanging fruit. The laws that people would be like, oh, we don't care about that. That's old, antiquated, needs to be amended. It's not actually being practiced. And if you need to do that, like legwork, to find out what laws are not actually being practiced. And then you can say, well, we have this batch of laws. Hey, they don't matter anymore. They're not actually the organizations that are not doing this. Can we remove that? And that actually builds conversation and momentum. And what it requires, honestly, is having people who are willing to lobby and work with our legislators at our state city governments. Currently, right now, our team has 2 people paid full-time who are formerly incarcerated, who are at the state legislature in our state, lobbying and having conversations with legislators and staffers on the ground. It requires that particularization, that requires that specificity. It requires pulling up the bills every session and figuring out which ones are more collateral consequences that are weighing on us. For example, in the state of Indiana, they want to create a massive database, Google searchable, of every person who's ever been convicted of a crime in the state of Indiana. And you're like, what? And what? Because they want to know who's sitting next to them in the pew in church. And I'm telling you that we have done some early calculations. There's over 750,000 people. And so what do you want to do with that data?
Right.
But enact more social consequences of criminal convictions. And it requires that kind of particularization.
If I can add too, I think the other thing it really requires to get policy solutions to these problems is that we need to humanize people with criminal convictions. This, Secretary King, you're right, this is a moral argument, and you can, and I understand this well in Louisiana, you cannot fight a moral argument with like facts and logic. It doesn't. I'm a researcher, I tried it, it doesn't work. They don't care, you have to show up with people, with compelling stories and life experience, and you have to get legislators to care. And when they care and when they're able to see humanity in someone else, that's when laws change. And we also have to, really address within that work too, the dehumanization of people of color in these spaces too, right? So in Louisiana, we had to bring a white woman with the same story as Sarita to get the ban the box legislation passed, because Sarita testified and the legislators were texting and they were walking out and they were doing whatever. And then a week later, we brought a white woman and they were in tears. And there was a standing ovation. And we had a legislator say, lift up your head, young lady, you are a person. Wow. You literally, like, right? So it's, you know, you are somebody, you're gonna be somebody, like, we love you. And it was amazing to me, right? But they saw, in that moment, that was their daughter, their sister, their neighbor, right? They saw her in a way that they didn't see Sarita. And while we did that because we needed to get the bill passed, and when the bill passed, it applies to everybody, right? And we understand that, that is still a huge problem that we need to figure out how to address in a meaningful way. And so that's what that's my dissertation on, is like,
Thank you. I remember that. That's a great example. But I also remember, like, when we were passing the dignity legislation around the country, we passed 10 pieces of legislation around making sure that the conditions of confinement for women were more humane while incarcerated. So making sure that we're ending shackling of women during child labor and making sure that women have proper hygiene products at no cost, family unification. And so women who led the legislation, including you all in Louisiana, did that. They came with their voices to the state capitol to talk to their local elected officials about what that looked like to them. And it was amazing just to see that we were able to pass 10 pieces of legislation nationwide in 10 different states. And around the First Step Act, it was the same thing when we were coming to DC and going in the Capitol. And I remember it was a strategy to have someone that, first of all, was from the elected's constituency, but also that looked like them. Because I could go into one place and they, you know, no matter how cute I might be, Gerard, they're not always necessarily listening to me. But if we bring someone that looks like their daughter, their mom, their grandma even, that they do listen. So I feel like that ties it back to like why it is so necessary and important to have people who have been impacted leading the conversation, along with our friends, our partners, our allies, because we can't lock each other out either. Because so often I'll hear, especially in the social justice space, that because a person is white, that they should not be speaking about their experience, which I don't think is cool, because you have had that experience. That's a lived experience. So irrespective to your race, your religion, you should have a right to speak up as well. So I just want to kind of lift that up because I heard what you said, but I wanted you to hear what I'm having to say about that too. Okay, so next. You know, I haven't heard from you in a little while. I didn't want to be so hard on you in the beginning. I hope you're good. I want to hear a little bit more from you because you're really powerful. So you want to say something too?
I think that one of the things that I always think about in regards to this issue is that I think that those who are empowered to make law, I think education has to be seen from a perspective of public safety. I think it's a public safety issue. And the reason why I say that is because, again, you know, we always talk about crime and recidivism, but I assure you that education reduces that. And if, you know, she spoke about people being blocked out from certain areas of employment and different things like that. And I think for those who are allowed to get higher education while in prison, I think that once they're home, free, doing a lot of productive things out in society, that those stories need to be highlighted. And not only highlighted, but those who are against or opposed from allowing these rights and liberties to former incarcerated people need to meet these people and see the story so that we can give humanity to these different things and they can see, because a lot of times people make laws and have these perceptions and stuff, but they never actually encounter the real people. They just hear this person went to prison for this, that, and the third, so they don't deserve to have this particular opportunity. But I've come to find in my experience that once you meet these individuals and you have a chance to talk to them and see who they are and see their humanity and bear witness, you know, to them as they are and see them as they are, that a lot of the opposition that people have, you know what I mean, to turn down some. And that's been my experience. And I also think that those who have a stake in our community or in our society, businesses, agencies, government, whatever it may be, everyone has an interest in being safe, right? And if you really want to be safe and you really want to minimize crime and stop people from committing crimes, then there has to be opportunities. But at the same time, people don't want to hire people that don't have education. If I have a company, whether you've been in prison or not, if you have this particular skill set to do what's required to advance my company, I'm going to hire you, convicted felon or not. But if you don't have the skill set and my bottom line is to do this, then why would I hire you? You understand what I'm saying? And so this is why these educational opportunities need to be made available. And then once people get out, man, you know, if people see that there's minimal risk in providing these opportunities to these people, I think that they'll have less reservations about you know, just being opposed to this stuff. Because at the end of the day, big picture, people have so much tunnel vision. Big picture, they'll see by providing these opportunities, you're actually minimizing the potential for further criminal conduct and criminal thinking. And I just think that these stories need to be publicized and made available. And for those who have never met someone like me or anyone on this panel or someone like Harlene, and just see the whole transformation and experience through education, I really think that, man, they'll get rid of some of the reservation or disdain that they have for people who are coming out of prison who have certain charges and being able to have certain opportunities or do certain types of jobs or have certain types of employment. I think that if a person is qualified for a particular thing, they should never be banned or barred from going into a particular field.
And that's a great point that you make when you talk about like violence versus nonviolence.
Right.
People having opportunity, right? Like so often it's about the nonviolent defendants,
Right.
or you know, when we write laws, it only specifically will help a certain type of crime, right? That when we're looking at really trying to change the criminal legal system in this country, we have to look at the entire spectrum. And like when you think of, or you know, I'm not, well I am, but when you think about, you know, recidivism rates and things, I know that they say people with a categorized crime of violence actually is less likely to go back to prison than a person who isn't. So, you know, I think about, we talked about a little bit about just DC being a district and not a state, so that DC, anyone who's convicted in DC actually goes to federal prison, which they will put people all the way across the country sometimes because of, you know, where, if there's room and things like that. But I really want to, you know, I'm shifting it a little bit, but I think that it's all relative, because I know even inside of prisons, depending on your length of your sentence, what type of access you have to education or additional programming. If you have life that you don't get access to education, but yet I know I've met some of the most brilliant people who had lengthy sentences that were better than some of the lawyers that I might have even paid 6 figures for during my legal, you know, stuff. So I feel like we have to give access to everyone, but also how do we begin to utilize some of those programming to also help with then saying that, hey, a person, despite what their charge was, that they have access, and then they can come home and also continue that education. So if anyone wants to talk about that specifically, the difference between the nonviolent and violent, and what are your thoughts around whether or not, if we're talking about this is a human rights issue, then is everyone considered for this opportunity?
Well, and I'll just say something really brief. When people come to offer a higher education program in prison, they don't separate the nonviolent from the violent. You sign up to go to school, period. And so the logic in that, for some people who have life sentences, someone will say, well, you're wasting your energy and effort, and because these people are never going home. First of all, that's not true. That's not always true. People have been exonerated. People have had PCRs and habeas corpus findings that have brought people home, so stop that. But also, care about the livability and survivability of prison. Prison is, most prisons, or I should say all prisons, are violent spaces. Violence is constitutive of prisons. So that means when you think prison, think violence. So if you really think about the quality of someone's living conditions, higher education is one of the only things in prisons that mediates that actually changes the culture of the living environments which people have. So if someone is about 160 years or what, that they can still have a quality of life and improve livability, survivability of prison by offering them higher education. And honestly, I also feel like they should be able to vote. But anyway, okay. I'm just saying. That's my opinion, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who disagree, and that's okay. But my point is, and I'll leave it there, let people, when you know that prisons are violent cesspools, have simple access to increase their livability and survivability of prison. Do that. That makes sense, and it's doable, because higher education programs are not weeding out who can be in and who can be out anyway.
I couldn't agree more, and I think people who are incarcerated are in community with the other folks in prison. So people have a huge impact on their peers, but they also are in community with their family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the example that someone can be for their child who's on the outside, or their family members on the outside who's trying to figure out what their life will be like, that impact is going to be greater and more positive if they have access to education while incarcerated. There's just no question about it. The thing I want to add too is that higher education is essential, access to GED programs is essential, but also access to literacy programs. And part of the reason I'm so happy we're doing this with Free Minds is that the truth is there are a lot of folks who are incarcerated whose skills would not allow them yet to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, and many prisons only offer, if they offer an educational program, a GED program, well, what if that's far beyond where your skills are? What if you are one of the dyslexic folks who are overrepresented in prisons who never had the opportunity to learn to read? Or one of those students with disabilities that were not adequately addressed in the K-12 system, which is part of why you didn't have access to opportunity, which is part of how you ended up in prison. We've got to address that. And so we've got to see this, again, as a start towards a comprehensive educational strategy, including in federal prisons. The federal prisons ought to be setting the example, but in point of fact, many federal prisons only offer GED programs. They're not offering higher ed programs, and they're not offering the range of literacy programs and adult education that's needed. So we have a ton of work to do.
So social anthropologists tell us that culture is defined as hopes, fears, and ideas transition from one generation to the next. The number of people I've talked to while I was visiting prison, talking to people who were formerly incarcerated, culture comes up every time, independent of length of stay. They said education or access to learning, because often we think education, we think program, but learning takes place all day long, it's ubiquitous. And so culture to them, like, it was a cultural change. Talking to parole officers, talking to prison guards, talking to correctional secretaries, they said it changes the culture, so culture matters a lot. Another group we've got to bring into this conversation are victims. Now, one of the reasons a number of people I know say to hell with giving anyone incarcerated an education is they think about someone they lost, either physically or through addiction to drugs and still alive. You've got Big Mama now having to raise grandchildren because of this. I don't make a moral statement over either side, but I'm saying that if we are to have a conversation about what this means, we've got to bring those who are victimized and victims to the table because they matter. There's a young man named, in fact, he was at the event, Center for Advanced Opportunity sponsored, Anton Lucky. He helped found the Bloods in Dallas. Through his group right now in Urban Strategies, they're bringing in moms or dads to talk to the person who killed their son or daughter. You talking about a heavy conversation. So I just put that into the Louisiana, to the gumbo of how we have to have this conversation about this. They've got to be a part of it too.
No, for sure. Howard? I'll wrap it? Okay. Told you I could keep going. All right, so then to wrap it, I guess the final thought would be for each of you to tell the audience how they can get involved. Like, what can they do? What can they do? Who should they contact? And even how can they reach you?
So Operation Restoration has all of the social media, so you can contact us that way. But I think particularly on this issue, we've been working with a broad group of organizations and individuals to create a coalition called Unlock Higher Ed. And the purpose of that group is to increase educational opportunities for folks with convictions. So we're looking at Pell Grants, looking at Ban the Box. We're also looking at the aid elimination penalty. We didn't even bring that up, but there's right now in the FAFSA a question that says, have you been convicted of a drug conviction while receiving federal financial aid? We're trying to get rid of that this year. It doesn't make any sense, right? That we would exclude these people from financial aid. So I would encourage you to join that coalition, either of your organization or as an individual. We have a listserv. We have monthly meetings in DC. Our next meeting is the 29th, which is Monday, at Trust space. Thanks, Ed Trust. And so I would encourage you to follow along with that and get involved. So thank you.
Basically, I'm not here on behalf of an organization or agency. I'm here just as a representative and advocate for higher education within the prisons. I think DC is in a different type of situation by us not being a state, by us not having a vote in the legislature. I just think that for those who would like to support this, just give with all the different organizations that are moving in that direction, and reach out to them and see in which ways you can further assist the struggle in this regard. Like I said, DC is just in a different situation because we don't control our own judicial system. The feds control that. We don't have our own prisons. So anything that we would implement, it still has to go through the federal government and the BOP. So it's just a different type of situation. So in that regard, I just think that I would recommend that whatever agencies are supporting this particular movement, just try to find ways to engage them and see how it is that you will support.
And you can be reached through also as a Free Minds member, in case somebody wants to book him for speaking. All right, Michelle.
So I would say, so I'm board chair of Constructing Our Future, and I have some brochures downstairs to talk a little bit about that. That's a reentry program that helps women obtain homes by flipping houses, and that's like my heart project. But I'm definitely interested in what Unlock Higher Ed is working and to actually get done and supporting this. But I also want you to think about the REAL Act and get your people to support it, and also to think about adding some measures in there that include representation of formerly incarcerated people in measuring the effects or the metrics of the programs doing well. About the REAL Act, there's still states that are not involved, that don't care, but there's a ton of community organizations that you can see on the website that are supportive of the REAL Act. Support those guys, and also write to your senators, write to your legislators to support it. I think that as we get prepared to expand what Pell can do, one of the next first steps is the REAL Act.
I agree with everything that's been said, edtrust.org. And the thing that I would encourage folks to do is convince members of Congress, members of state legislatures to go visit higher education programs in prisons, to meet with current students, alumni, talk with them about their experience, go to graduations. I think we have to make it so that folks really see what this looks like, because I believe if every member of Congress and every member of state legislatures, every governor spent time with you all and with students in current programs, they would be transformed by that, and their views on the issue would be transformed.
So the Center for Advancing Opportunity, where I serve as Executive Director, is an education and research initiative here in DC. We were created through a partnership between the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, the Charles Koch Institute, and Koch Industries. And what we do is we invest money into students and faculty at historically black colleges and universities, public and private, to get involved in education, criminal justice, and entrepreneurship. So what I would say is go to advancingopportunity.org and let us know how we can help. In terms of the role that I'm walking right now, this really is a selfless plug. But I just published a co-edited book. It's called Education for Liberation: The Politics of Promise and Reform Inside and Beyond America's Prison. The two people who co-authored the forward for this, if we're talking about bipartisanship, on the left, Van Jones. On the right, Newt Gingrich. That's a whole other conversation. But I want to work with scholars, with thinkers, people who graduated summa cum laude, or those who graduated thank the Lord. I want to work with folks who are working in this area to figure out how we move the needle, because professors are going to play a tremendous role in this conversation. And my giveaway to you is call your university, figure out whether or not your university is involved with the Second Chance Pell Initiative, or if not, are you involved in any way with an Inside Out program or not? You, as a graduate of your institution, have a strong voice. You can move your admissions directors and people in ways I can't. And one thing I want to do is I want to thank John for his role as Secretary of Education. That's a tough job. There's a lot of issues he could have picked. This is one that he decided to pick. And so one of the things we can do to support his legacy and that of the Obama administration, and also Arnie, is to go back and talk to your university professors and presidents, because brand matters, and so does your voice.
Absolutely. I just want to add one last thing. So in Indiana, I talked about that we have our own lobbyists, our own formerly incarcerated women who have been pulling testimony of other formerly incarcerated people to testify in the state legislature in this session. It's our first year getting it done. I think that it is something that is cost effective. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and that you can actually get these voices to the state legislatures, and so that they can get their stories. We actually pull them off to the side in the hallways if need be. And having them on the ground has been expanding for them. Now they're learning how their system works, and they're actually a part of the civic duty and civic participation that is the right of all of us as citizens, and that's important work. And I think it's replicatable across the country.
Thank you, Michelle.
And Michelle has a...
No.
Essay.
Yeah, that's it.
So everybody get that book. So that's another plug. Make sure you get the book. But I want to thank everyone for joining here in the room today on live stream, and also all the panelists for this very necessary conversation to continue forward this evening. There will be a Twitter chat. So please join EdTrust, Free Minds, Vera, and FAM on the Twitter chat tonight on the power of high quality education for incarcerated students at 8 p.m. Eastern. Use the hashtag Second Chances Chat. And this will be through EdTrust Twitter or everybody? Okay, so everybody's Twitter. Second Chances Chat is the Twitter hashtag for 8 p.m. for the Twitter power chat this evening. And you can reach me at thelohm.org for my organization, or on all social media, Topeka K. Sam. So thank you, everyone.